I think I feel the same way about Ty Warren as I did about Ashton Genty. I think if you end up drafting him, you're going to get a really good football player. But at this point, this team has not protected their quarterback and not been good enough at the offensive line position across the board. I think Warren is kind of similar to Cole. When you've got $12 million invested a year in Cole, if you're going to draft this kid, then you could use that $12 million in another position.
What do you believe, Field, is the perfect scenario for the Bears at number 10?
Man, you and I have had this conversation offline about, is it worth taking a running back 10 overall, given the fact that this is a very, very deep draft class. And there's a scenario where at number 39 or 41, the Bears can get players like Quinshon Judkins or Travion Henderson from Ohio State. And then further down the board, an R.J. Harvey or a Cam Scadaboo from UCF and Arizona State, respectively. I'm not saying this because I'm on Chicago radio. I've talked about this extensively on First Draft with Mel Kiper Jr. and Greedy. It's pretty rare for me to feel as though a running back would be worthwhile to go in the top 10 because I view elite running backs as much more the icing on the cake than the foundation of a team that is going to be playing in the playoffs that upcoming year or within a year. I think we all agree that the Bears underachieved last year relative to the talent on the roster. I also overestimated how ready the offensive line was for showtime last year, so I admit that I was too optimistic on them going into the year, but I still felt like there was more meat on the bone than a 5-12 record that included that 10-game losing streak would indicate. I think this team is kind of ready for a leap this year. Maybe that's just a confidence in Ben Johnson and what he brings to the table as a play caller and how I expect him and Caleb Williams to mesh very seamlessly this year. But a running back is not that crazy to me at number 10. Obviously, it would only be Ashton Genty. So if it's not Genty, I do think Tyler Warren is extremely intriguing as well. And it seems like, and taking the temperature of a fan base on Twitter can be a bit of a dangerous exercise. I'll throw one more name in there that I felt like I have intel on, and I'm just telling you how I feel about the player. Kelvin Banks is a really good player, guys. Texas left tackle who won the Outland Trophy last year, best lineman in college football, 3 straight years as a starting left tackle for Texas. He has an 85-inch wingspan, so we talked a ton about how Will Campbell has these, Joe Tooney-like arms, where you have to overcome it like Joe has. Kelvin Banks' 85-inch wingspan is very, very good for an offensive tackle. And, on top of the really good physical traits, also an excellent, excellent young man. And when you're making these investments high in the draft, you need to know that you're not just drafting the right player, but in some cases the right, as importantly, the right person. So I don't think enough offensive line investments there's no team that has enough offensive line investments already other than maybe Philadelphia. So if they go tackle at 10, I'm not going to sit here and begrudge them.
As good as you think Genty is, Field, if you were Ben Johnson and he felt the way that you feel about him, is trading up for him a decent decision, or is that something you wouldn't do?
I would resist the temptation to trade up. And here's the reason why. Listen, I don't know how. I have no idea how costly it would be. I don't think the Bears are going to, if it's, and I'm just making this up here, but if it's 10 and 39 to get to 5, I'd rather go through door B, which is potentially Tyler Warren or Kelvin Banks or, Michael Williams or Jalen Walker plus a second-round running back. Like, that would be the path that I would go instead. However, I just, if it's whatever, 10 and a 4th-round pick to get up to number 5, which I don't think it would be, but I would consider it if I'm the Bears. I just think it has to be so much more on your terms than it is on terms of the team that is trading down. I love the player. I really do. He's the 4th-rated player on my board is Ashton Genty. And I don't think the analysis surrounding him has been completely exaggerated at all. And I think he would have a legitimate path to Pro Bowl upside right away and do so much for Caleb Williams for a team that at least sniffed around on Saquon Barkley last offseason. I think sees some value in having an established star running back or a star running back in this offense. I wouldn't make the trade up. I'd rather let the board fall to me at number 10.
With your intel, Field, what do you give a % chance of Genty being there at 10?
I think there's actually a decent chance. I'm going to go 50% that Genti actually makes it to number 10.
Wow.
Let's just work through the logical suitors ahead of the Bears. There's been a lot of talk today. Would the Jaguars do that at number 5? Listen, it's possible for sure. And it's a new regime. So some of the prior investments, you have to acknowledge that they just may not mean as much to the new regime. But guys, Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, first and third round picks over the past 3 years. You've already picked up the 5th-year option on Etienne. Are we sure that it's a running back that Jacksonville's biggest issue has been? And again, you can make that same case for the Bears. I have so much confidence in what Ben Johnson can do with a player like Ashton Genti because we've seen him, I would say design amongst the most impressive running games, if not the most impressive running game in the entire NFL last season in terms of scheme, not just running the same plays over and over again to great effect. So I think it's Jacksonville. I'm not buying as much. And the Raiders, it's definitely possible. It's Pete Carroll. He's 73 years old. I don't think they want this to be some 8-year rebuild. At the same time, they got a lot of needs, man. They got a lot of needs. And their GM, John Spytek, he's talked about 2 things very openly. Ashton Genti, he's also talked about how he likes linemen. And, he comes from Tampa Bay where they invested heavily along that offensive line. So part of mock drafts is using sort of historical trends with the GMs if they haven't been in that position for very long, which is the case for Spytek. It's his first draft. You kind of look at the roots of where he was previously. So I think there's a chance that Genti makes it there because after those 2 teams, I'd be surprised if the Jets, Panthers, or Saints went that direction.
How loud a voice do you expect Ben Johnson to have in the draft room?
I think it's loud. I actually thought this was, and coincidentally, I'm going right back to John Spytek on this, but I saw the quote, and I almost wanted to clip it and just sort of share it with everybody because he and Pete Carroll were giving their press conference. I think this was a couple days ago, maybe it was Friday of last week. And someone asked point blank, who has the final say on the roster? If you have a player that you can't decide and Pete likes him and John doesn't, is it Pete's vote or is it John's vote that ends up sort of taking the cake? And John Spytek said, it's not, neither of us. You know why? We're not taking players we don't have consensus on. So I think that it's a dynamic that it's important in very, very, very select cases. I think ultimately, and I'm not trying to sound like a company man for Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles, but ultimately, if the front office and the head and the coaching staff aren't aligned on the player, the issues are much more deeper rooted than just whose name is in the contract in terms of having roster control, which obviously Ryan Poles does. But I think he is doing his best, or he will be doing his best to make Ben Johnson happy, right? I think that would be, and it seems like the early returns of what they've done roster-wise would suggest that they are sort of following Ben Johnson's preferred style of roster building. So my guess is that this will be a very, very, very cohesive effort. And, if I'm Ryan Poles, I'm thinking to myself, shoot, I've seen what Ben can do when he has the pieces that he wants, and that's build the best offense in the league. So why wouldn't I try to recreate some of that magic by sort of catering to what he wants the most?
Field Yates joining us, Waddle and Silvy on ESPN 1000. I've told you off the air, and Waddle's made it, common knowledge on the air, that he likes Ty Warren. He does.
Yep.
But he doesn't believe that he would love the pick at 10. Tell him why you would love Ty Warren to the Bears at 10, and you guys can have a discussion on this.
Yeah, so first of all, let's start with the context of this draft class. This draft class does not have a bunch of, as I mentioned earlier, blue chip. You got to take these guys if they're sitting there at number 10 prospects. So Ty Warren is amongst the smaller number of guys that I really believe could fall into that category. And I really feel as though there are 2 teams who, based off of the player they already have at tight end and where that player is at both in terms of age and contract, where I'd say to myself, I probably wouldn't take Ty Warren. It's the Raiders with Brock Bowers and the Cardinals with Trey McBride, who just got that new big money deal. Everybody else, as much as I like Cole Kmet, he's a rock-solid player and a key part of that locker room and a good podcaster as well, I should note. Cole, I don't think Cole is such a difference-making cog at tight end that the passing game revolves around where you need to not add another a player to that room. I think Warren, his run-after-catch stuff is so impressive. He didn't run a 40 during the pre-draft process, and I wouldn't be surprised, Tommy, if it wasn't great. I think, maybe solid, but not special. It's just not a 4, 5, 7 guy at tight end, if I had to guess. But he does so mumuch as a blocker. I mean, he's so versatile. 48% of his snaps last year were as an inline tight end, 32% of his snaps were as a slot tight end. He aligned way out wide on occasion as well, sort of a de facto receiver role. He took 39 snaps last season as a quarterback, out of the Wildcat, obviously. He's just such a versatile player that when you have a creative play caller, a la Ben Johnson, and I'm sorry that I keep coming back to that, but I think it's hard not to. I would really imagine that he would sit there and say to himself, if I have Ty Warren on my team, the amount of things you can cook up for a guy like that is pretty intriguing.
Yeah, I would reiterate what Silvy said first and foremost. I think he's a fantastic player. The second thing I would say, if they draft him and he has 39 snaps from under center, I'm off the Ben Johnson bandwagon. I feel the same way about Ty Warren as I did about Ashton Genty. I think if you end up drafting him, you're going to get a really good football player. But at this point, this team has not protected their quarterback and not been good enough at the offensive line position across the board. I know they've addressed it in a number of ways this offseason. They don't get after the pass or the opposing quarterback with a pass rush consistently enough for me. I think they have other needs that are more important. And at the tight end position, I would suggest that I think Warren is kind of similar to Cole. Maybe better with the ball in his hands afterwards, but I think statistically, if you go back to the combine, I think Cole was taller, bigger hands, longer wingspan, higher vertical, comparable 40. I think they're too similar for me to play in the same way. If you wanted to draft the kid from Michigan, Loveland, who I think is a little bit different beast, that would be more acceptable to me. I just think that when you've got $12 million invested a year in Cole, if you're going to draft this kid, then you could use that $12 million in another position.
Yeah, listen, I think part of the beauty of the draft this year is that a lot of reasonable minds can disagree, because I do believe, and I'm doing my final mock draft. I've been working on it as we speak here. I haven't quite gotten to number 10, but I've sort of mapped out some picks, and what I found is that, there are guys who we've seen sort of quote unquote rise and fall during this process because opinions are all over the place this year. So, I think Tyler Warren offers just a tremendous amount of upside that Cole Kmet doesn't have at the same level. I think Cole's a really good player. I think asset allocation is not crazy if you have two tight ends that are, foundational pieces of your roster. But, there might be somebody out there who's saying, hey, they need more edge rushing presence. They need another offensive tackle, because it's great that they could line up, maybe not tomorrow because Braxton Jones is still recovering from that ankle surgery, but they could line up in September with their starting five. But injury attrition, like what the Bills and the Broncos did last year with basically trotting out the same group every week, not that I need to remind Bears fans of this, but that's not the norm. That is very much the exception. So I am not Ryan Poles said something early on in the process, which I can't remember which movie came after. I think it might have been at the Combine, where he said, hey, we've just opened up the board, and because of the offensive line addition. And I do feel like amongst all the things that you hear GMs say throughout the pre-draft process, you have to sift through what's honest and what's sincere. That felt to me like a legitimate admission by him. This is not he's not trying to. I think there are enough things that we hear from GMs. It's like, all right, you're just trying to kind of goad us into thinking that it's going that direction when it's really not. I do feel like the Bears board is wide open.
All right, I've got one more for you. I don't know if Waddle's got one, but then I got a personal question for you at the end. Yeah. So as far as trading down, we had this conversation in our pre-show fist fight too. A lot of Bears fans love to just say, let's trade down and then take so-and-so. The problem is, Field, you have to have someone who wants to come up to 10. Do you believe anyone wants to come up to 10 where the Bears can, in fact, trade down?
I do think it's possible that somebody could want to come up to number 10. I do think it's also possible that could be because a team wants a tight end. It's certainly possible. But it could also be as simple as a smaller move down. There was a few years ago, the Buccaneers moved up to get Tristan Wirfs. I want to say it was a spot or two guys. So we do see these mini jumps that I think could be in play at number 10, just because there are so few players at premium positions that we view as these blue chip can't miss guys. It just feels like predicting trade ups is a lot harder to do this year. and because a lot of teams are saying to themselves, we could move up to get those guys at 10, or we could take a player who is rated about the same on our board at 16 or 18 or 20 or whatever it might be.